The afternoon sky over the alien world was a strange shade between gold and green. Clouds moved in slow spirals, as if stirred by invisible hands. Mira had never seen a place like this. She had come as a representative from Earth, sent to speak with the insectoid tribe known as the Zark, who controlled much of this jungle-covered planet. Her task was to discuss trade and peace. She had carried a translator device, a few supplies, and a heart full of hope. But things had gone wrong from the start. The Zark had met her and her small escort at the edge of the jungle. At first they listened, their tall, thin bodies swaying, slightly as if thinking. Their shiny black eyes reflected the sunlight, unreadable. Mira had explained her purpose, told them of the benefits of trade, of how humans could share knowledge in farming, medicine, and technology. But the Zark did not seem interested. They whispered among themselves in their clicking language. Her translator caught only a few words: weak, soft, test. Moments later, warriors stepped forward. They were taller than the others, with thick armor like shells on their limbs and jagged ridges along their backs. They carried long spears tipped with crystal blades. One raised his spear toward Mira's escort. The humans were surrounded before they could react. Her guards reached for their tools and shields, but the Zark moved faster. The air filled with a deep vibrating hum as more warriors appeared from the trees. Mira stood still, her breath steady but her mind racing. She knew that fighting here was hopeless. The Zark outnumbered them 5-1. The warriors did not kill them, but they bound Mira's wrists with strong plant fibers that burned slightly against her skin. The Zark led her away, leaving her escort behind. She shouted for them, but the sound was swallowed by the jungle's constant hum of insect wings and distant animal calls. The path they took was narrow and winding. Trees with huge twisted roots rose high into the air. Vines hung like ropes. The air smelled of damp earth and something sharp, like metal. The Zark walked quickly, their long legs making it hard for Mira to keep pace. When she slowed, a warrior behind her tapped her shoulder with the blunt end of his spear, urging her forward. Mira's thoughts kept circling. Why had they taken her? What did they mean by test? She had read about alien cultures that judged worth through strength or skill. Perhaps they did not believe humans were capable of surviving in their world. She remembered the stories told by explorers how the Zark respected only those who could face danger without fear. Hours passed, though the strange light in the sky made it hard to tell. Finally, the jungle opened into a wide clearing. At its center rose a pit, its edges lined with thorny vines as thick as her arm. Around the pit, dozens of Zark gathered, clicking and hissing to one another. Their voices rose and fell in a rhythm, almost like a chant. The warrior leading her stopped at the pit's edge. Mira peered down. Shadows moved far below, but the bottom was hidden in darkness. The sound of slow, heavy breathing rose from below. It was deep and steady, like the pulse of the earth. Every instinct told her that something large was waiting down there. The tallest of the Zarks stepped forward. His armor was marked with streaks of bright red paint, and a necklace of polished stones hung around his neck. He spoke, and her translator crackled to life. "You are human," the voice of the translator said in its flat, mechanical tone. "You claim to bring wisdom. You claim to bring strength of mind. We see only a soft body and small hands. We test you now." Mira lifted her chin. "What kind of test?" she asked, her voice calm. She had learned that showing fear often invited more aggression. The leader's mandibles clicked. "The nest of the Great One waits below. No Zark enters and lives. If you are what you claim, you will survive. If not, you will be forgotten." Mira's stomach tightened, but her face stayed still. She looked into the pit again. The breathing below shifted, becoming faster, as if whatever was down there knew what was coming. The vines round the edges trembled slightly. Two warriors stepped forward and untied her wrists. They did not do it as an act of kindness. They simply wanted her to have no excuse, no restriction on her movement. One of them took the small satchel from her shoulder and tossed it down into the pit. It vanished into the shadows. The leader raised his arm. The chant of the crowd grew louder. The air seemed to thicken with heat and expectation. Mira's heart beat faster, but she forced herself to breathe slowly. She thought of her training, of the countless times she had been told that sometimes survival was not about fighting, but about thinking differently. The warriors behind her pushed gently at first. Then more firmly, she stepped to the very edge. The vines looked sharp enough to cut skin at a single touch. Below, something shifted again, and a low growl rose from the darkness. It was not the sound of fear. It was a sound of warning. The leader gave a sharp click, and two warriors shoved her forward. She fell, brushing against the vines as she dropped. The thorns caught her clothing in places, tearing small lines through the fabric. But she managed to twist her body to avoid being badly cut. The air rushed past her ears, and then her feet hit the soft ground below. She landed hard on one knee, the impact sending a dull ache up her leg. The noise from above faded slightly, replaced by the sound of the creature's breathing. She could see more now. The walls of the pit rose high, lined with roots and vines. The floor was covered with damp soil, scattered bones, and pieces of shed scales that glimmered faintly in the dim light. And then it moved. From the shadows at the far side of the pit, a massive head emerged. It was shaped like that of an ancient reptile from Earth, but larger and more heavily armored. Thick ridges ran along the top of its skull, and its scales shifted in color as it moved, from deep green to a dull bronze. Two eyes, bright yellow with narrow black pupils, fixed on her with sharp focus. Mira stayed still, her breath steady. The reptile's nostrils flared as it drew in her scent. Its mouth opened slightly, revealing teeth curved like hooks. The air smelled faintly of sulfur. From above, the crowd grew silent, waiting for the first strike. The leader's voice rang out, the translator barely catching the words, "Show us, human. Show us if you are worthy." Mira met the creature's gaze and took one slow step forward. She knew she had no weapon, no armor. But she also knew one thing: if this was a test, the only way to pass was to understand the rules no one had spoken aloud. The reptile stepped fully into the light, its body so large that its head alone seemed as long as Mira's entire height. Sunlight filtered down through gaps in the vines above, catching on the shifting colors of its scales. Every movement was slow and deliberate, like a predator that had never needed to rush to catch prey. Its tail dragged along the ground, leaving deep grooves in the soil. Each claw on its feet was curved and sharp, pressing into the earth with a faint crunch. The air between Mira and the reptile felt heavy, as if the weight of its presence alone was enough to push the breath from her chest. From above, the Zarks stood in a perfect circle, leaning over the pit's edge. Their shiny eyes reflected the scene, unblinking. The leader stood at the highest point, his red markings bright against his dark shell. He gave a single low click, and the crowd went silent. The reptile's head tilted slightly, as if studying her. Its eyes moved from her face to her empty hands, then to the satchel lying a few steps away. Mira noticed the way its nostrils flared again, taking in her scent. She could almost feel it deciding whether she was a threat, a meal, or something else entirely. Her heart was beating quickly now, but she forced herself to slow her breathing. She remembered the advice from her survival training. When faced with a creature you do not understand, your first weapon is observation. Attacking without knowledge is the fastest way to fail. She crouched slowly, making no sudden moves. Her eyes stayed on the reptile as she reached for the satchel. It did not lunge. Instead, it shifted its weight, its claws digging deeper into the ground. The growl that came from its throat was not a full roar, but a warning. Mira opened the satchel just enough to feel inside. She found one of her food packs, a small sealed container that held dried fruit and grain. The scent was faint, but she knew most animals could smell food far better than humans could. She peeled the seal slowly, letting the sweet smell drift into the air. The reptile's head lowered slightly, its pupils widening. The growl faded to silence. Its tail gave a slow, sweeping motion, not in aggression, but in curiosity. From above, the Zark began clicking among themselves, their voices carrying both surprise and interest. Mira did not look up. Her focus stayed on the reptile. She held the food out in front of her, keeping her hand steady. "You're not going to hurt me," she whispered under her breath. She knew the creature could not understand her words, but tone and body language were a language of their own. The reptile took one slow step forward. The ground trembled faintly beneath its weight. Another step followed. Mira kept her body relaxed, though every instinct told her to move back. When it was close enough, the reptile lowered its head until its snout was only an arm's length away. Its breath was warm and smelled faintly of minerals and something wild, like stone after rain. It sniffed the air near her hand, then gave a short huff, very gently. Mira tossed the food toward its mouth. The reptile caught it with surprising speed, snapping its jaws shut. The sound of the bite echoed off the pit walls. It chewed slowly. Its eyes still locked on her. The Zark above made a series of sharp clicks. Some sounded disapproving, others curious. They had expected the Great One to attack at once. This was not part of the pattern they had seen before. Mira crouched again. Searching in her satchel, she pulled out a water pouch. The reptile's tongue flicked out briefly, tasting the air. Mira tore open the pouch and poured a small stream into her hand. The reptile leaned forward and licked the water from her palm with a tongue rough like stone. The contact was brief but important. It did not bite. It did not strike. Suddenly, a sharp movement came from above. One of the younger Zark, perhaps bored or impatient, hurled a spear into the pit. The weapon spun through the air toward Mira. Before she could react, the reptile moved. Its massive tail swung upward with a burst of speed, striking the spear mid-flight. The crystal tip shattered into fragments, scattering across the pit floor. The crowd above gasped in one united hiss. Mira's pulse quickened, not from fear, but from realization. The reptile had not only spared her, but had actively stopped an attack against her. This was no mindless beast. The leader of the Zark raised both arms, silencing the murmurs above. His eyes narrowed, watching closely now. The test had taken a turn he had not expected. The reptile stepped closer again, so close that Mira could see the tiny scratches along its scales and the faint cracks near the edges of its claws. She noticed something else too. Its breathing was uneven, one side of its chest rising slower than the other. Perhaps it was injured or sick. She reached up slowly, placing her hand on the ridge of its snout. The skin there was cool and smooth, the scales overlapping like plates of armor. The reptile's eyes half closed, and it released a low rumble that was not threatening. Mira felt the weight of dozens of eyes on her from above. She could not see their expressions, but she knew what they were thinking. This was not how the test was supposed to go. Her mind worked quickly. If the Zark respected only strength and survival, perhaps showing mastery over the Great One would change how they saw her and humans in general. But mastery did not always mean violence. It could mean forming a bond. The reptile took a step to the side, as if inviting her to move with it. Mira followed, her hand still resting lightly on its snout. Together they made a slow circle inside the pit. Every step of the creature was heavy and certain, while hers were careful but confident. Above, the leader gave another series of clicks to his warriors. Mira did not understand the exact words, but the tone was clear confusion mixed with reluctant respect. The reptile finally stopped in the center of the pit. It lowered its body, almost like a giant laying down to rest. Mira stepped back slightly, giving it space. She knew this moment was important. The Great One had not seen her as prey. It had accepted her presence. The crowd above began to murmur. Again, their voices building in volume. The leader did not silence them this time. Instead, he stepped closer to the edge of the pit and stared down at Mira for a long moment. Mira kept her eyes on the reptile, but she could feel the leader's gaze like a weight on her shoulders. She had passed the first part of their unspoken challenge, but she knew it was not over. The real test might be what came next. The reptile shifted its head toward her again, as if waiting for her next move. Mira understood the choice before her. She could either try to climb out and face the Zark immediately, or she could continue to build trust with the creature and change the entire nature of this trial. She tightened her grip on her satchel, feeling the remaining supplies inside. Above, the light from the strange green-gold sky filtered down in thin beams. catching the reptile's eyes until they glowed like molten gold. And in that moment, Mira decided her path. The Great One's gaze did not waver. It was the kind of stare that could unsettle even the most seasoned warrior. But Mira did not flinch. She kept her breathing calm, her movements slow. Every second she spent near the creature without harm was another step toward proving herself. From above, the Zark still watched in silence. The leader's tall form was rigid, his mandibles twitching slightly. The younger warriors shifted on their feet, restless. They had expected the trial too. And quickly. This was taking longer, and the result was uncertain. The reptile tilted its head, as though curious about Mira's hesitation. It sniffed at her again, its nostrils flaring. She could feel its warm breath against her face. The sound of its breathing was uneven, and now that she was closer, she could see a faint line of dried blood along one of its foreleg's dot. Mira took a small step forward. She reached into her satchel and pulled out a thin cloth. It was not much, but it was all she had. She moved toward the reptile's injured leg, keeping her voice low and steady. "I can help you," she said softly. Though she knew it could not understand her words, the reptile's eyes narrowed slightly. Its muscles tensed, but it did not strike. Mira crouched beside the leg, her hands moving slowly. She used the cloth to wipe away some of the dry blood. The scales underneath were scratched but not deeply cut. The reptile made a low rumbling. Sound not a growl, but something almost thoughtful. From above came a sudden sharp click from the leader. Mira glanced up briefly. He was watching her every move with an intensity that made it clear. He saw this as more than just a trial. She suspected the Zark had never seen anyone approach the Great One like this. The reptile shifted its weight slightly, allowing her better access to its injury. Mira took this as a sign of trust. She reached for her water pouch and poured a little over the wound, cleaning away more dirt. The reptile flinched at first but stayed still. When she finished, she stepped back, giving it space. The Great One lowered its head close to hers. Its eyes met hers for a long moment. Then, slowly, it made a deep, resonant sound that echoed in the pit. It was a sound she had not heard before, a tone that seemed to vibrate in her chest. The Zark above began murmuring again, their voices mixing surprise with disbelief. A few of the younger ones leaned over the edge to get a better view. Suddenly, another movement caught her attention. On the far side of the pit, between the twisted vines, a smaller shape appeared. It was another reptile, much younger, no larger than a large dog. Its scales were duller, and it moved with a quick, nervous energy. Mira realized this must be one of the Great One's offspring. The young reptile stepped into the open, chirping softly. It glanced at Mira, then at the larger one. The Great One gave a short rumble in return. Mira understood this was not just a nest. It was a home. She crouched again, lowering herself to appear less threatening. The small reptile approached cautiously, its head tilting from side to side. Mira reached into her satchel and pulled out a small piece of dried fruit. She placed it on the ground and slid it forward. The young reptile sniffed at it before snapping it up. The Great One watched closely but made no move to interfere. Instead, it lowered its head even further until its snout almost touched the ground beside Mira. She felt the vibration of its slow breathing and realized it was no longer just tolerating her. It was allowing her into its space completely. Above, a loud click rang out. One of the younger Zark had drawn another spear. This time, the target was not Mira but the small reptile. Perhaps they saw it as a weakness, a way to provoke the Great One into turning on her. The spear left the warrior's hand, spinning down toward the pit. Before Mira could move, the Great One reacted. Its head swung upward with a burst of speed, and its jaws snapped shut around the spear mid-flight. The sound of the break was sharp and final. The crowd above recoiled, their voices rising into an unsettled hiss. The Great One dropped the broken spear to the ground and stepped closer to Mira, placing itself between her and the edges of the pit. It lifted its head toward the Zark above and released a roar so powerful that the vines on the pit walls shook. The small reptile echoed the sound with a higher-pitched call. Mira understood what had happened. The Great One had chosen to protect her. The leader of the Zark raised one long arm. The murmurs stopped instantly. His gaze moved from the Great One to Mira, then back again. Something in his expression had shifted. It was not exactly approval, but it was no longer pure judgment. Mira stood tall now, her hand resting gently on the Great One's side. She could feel the steady rhythm of its breathing, a sign of calm rather than aggression. She had passed some unspoken boundary in this trial, though she knew it was not over yet. The small reptile moved closer to her, brushing against her leg. She resisted the urge to smile, knowing the Zark might see it as weakness. Instead, she kept her posture strong and her gaze steady on the leader. The leader clicked once, a deep, deliberate sound. The warriors nearest him began to move, lowering ropes into the pit. Mira's muscles tensed. She did not know if this meant the trial was ending or if another part was beginning. The Great One stepped forward, its massive head brushing against one of the ropes. It did not bite it, but its presence alone made the warriors hesitate. Mira realized she might have to decide quickly whether to leave the pit or stay with the creature. Her mind raced. If she left now, the Zark might see her as having survived. Only by the Great One's mercy. If she stayed, she might prove that she was not just a survivor, but someone worthy of their respect. The leader gave another series of clicks, his voice low but commanding. The warriors pulled the ropes back up. Whatever was coming next, it would not involve climbing out of the pit. The Great One settled down again, folding its limbs beneath its body. The small reptile curled up beside it, still watching Mira. The air in the pit was warmer now, the smell of damp earth and scales filling her senses. Mira took a seat a short distance away, keeping both reptiles in her sight. She knew the Zark were still watching closely. Every movement she made was part of the test. Above, the golden-green light of the alien sky shifted as the strange sun moved behind a spiral of clouds. Shadows deepened in the pit. Mira could feel that the next stage of this trial was about to begin, and she would need to be ready for anything. The pit was quiet except for the slow breathing of the two reptiles. Mira sat with her back against the wall of tangled roots, her eyes fixed on the Great One. The creature's golden eyes glowed faintly in the dim light. The small reptile was curled beside it, occasionally lifting its head to glance at her before resting again. Above, the Zark had not moved away. They were still watching, their dark eyes unblinking. The leader stood with his arms folded, silent but alert. Mira could feel his attention like a weight. She knew that whatever happened next would decide how they judged her. Her thoughts moved quickly. She had survived in the pit longer than any outsider they had tested. She had gained the trust of the Great One. But trust was fragile, and she suspected the Zark might try to break it. The sound came first as a faint rustle from one side of the pit. Mira turned her head, scanning the shadows. The Great One lifted its head too, nostrils flaring. The small reptile made a soft chirp and pressed closer to its parent. From between the thick vines at the far wall, a new shape emerged. It was another reptile, but leaner and with jagged scars along its body. Its eyes were a dull orange, and its movements were sharp, almost twitching. Mira could tell at once this was not part of the Great One's nest. Above, several Zark warriors shifted position. They were watching closely, but none moved to stop the intruder. Mira understood they had let this happen. The leader wanted to see how she would handle danger that came not from them, but from the world itself. The intruder's tail lashed against the ground, scattering dirt and small bones. It gave a hiss that rose into a short, sharp roar. The Great One rumbled in return, a deep sound that vibrated through the pit floor. The small reptile hid completely behind its parent. Mira's heart quickened, but she stayed still. She had no weapon. All she had was the fragile connection she had built with the Great One. If she moved wrong, that connection might break. The intruder advanced, its head low, teeth bared. The Great One moved to intercept, but the space was narrow, and the smaller reptile was trapped between them. Mira saw it instantly. The intruder was aiming to get past the Great One and strike the smaller one. She reacted before thinking. Mira stepped forward, putting herself between the small reptile and the intruder's path. She kept her hands open and her body steady. The intruder's eyes flicked toward her. Confused by the strange, soft-skinned creature standing in its way, the Great One shifted, blocking from the other side. Now Mira and the Great One formed a wall in front of the smaller reptile. The intruder struck first, lunging at Mira with surprising speed. She moved back, avoiding the snap of its jaws by a narrow margin, before it could try again. The Great One swung its massive head and struck the intruder's side, sending it stumbling across the pit. The crowd above made a sudden wave of clicking sounds, some sharp with excitement, others low with surprise. The intruder was not finished. It rose again, snarling, and rushed forward, this time the Great One's tail lashed out, knocking the intruder completely off its feet. The ground shook with the impact. The small reptile chirped again, still hidden but peeking out now. Mira stayed in place, her eyes on the intruder. It was breathing hard now, one leg bent awkwardly from the last blow. It looked from her to the Great One, then back again. Whatever it saw made it pause. The Great One rumbled deeply, stepping forward until it loomed over the intruder. The small reptile gave a soft trill from behind Mira, as if echoing its parent's command. The intruder hissed once more, then turned and slipped back into the shadows it had come from. Silence filled the pit again, but it was different now. The Great One turned its head toward Mira. She could see the faint flare of its nostrils and the calm focus in its eyes. Slowly, it lowered its head until it was level with hers. She reached out and rested her hand against its snout. It did not pull away. From above, the leader of the Zark clicked once sharp and loud. The sound rippled through the crowd, and every warrior stepped back from the pit's edge in unison. It was a gesture Mira did not fully understand, but it felt like the first sign of respect she had been given. The Great One moved past her and nuzzled the smaller reptile, checking it for harm. The young one made a happy, high-pitched sound and then walked toward Mira. Sniffing at her hands and feet, she crouched to meet its gaze, and it gently bumped its head against her knee. A quiet warmth filled her chest. She had not only earned the trust of the Great One, but also its offspring. The Zark leader spoke then, his voice low but carrying clearly. The translator on Mira's belt flickered and caught the words. The Great One does not protect the weak. It does not share its nest with the unworthy. You stand in the nest, and it stands with you. This we see. Mira straightened, meeting his gaze without looking away. Then you know humans are not what you thought. The leader tilted his head slightly. Perhaps the trial is not over. His words sent a ripple of reaction through the crowd. Mira knew this meant there was still more to come. As the leader turned away, the other Zark followed, leaving only a few guards to watch from above. The Great One settled again, this time much closer to Mira. The small reptile lay between them, its sides rising and falling with slow, steady breaths. Mira stayed awake as the strange alien sky shifted colors above. She thought about Earth, about the people who were counting on her to succeed. This trial had started as a way to humiliate her, but now it was something else entirely. She glanced at the Great One. The bond between them was no longer fragile, it was solid, born from shared defense and mutual trust, and she had the feeling that this bond would be tested again before the trial was done. In the quiet of the pit, with the jungle sounds far above, Mira made herself a silent promise. She would see this through, no matter what the Zark planned next. The strange gold and green sky above the pit darkened as thick clouds swirled overhead. The air grew heavy, carrying the faint scent of rain. Mira sat near the Great One, her knees drawn up, her eyes scanning the rim of the pit. The small reptile lay curled beside its parent, occasionally glancing at her with wide, curious eyes. From above, the remaining Zark guards watched in silence. They had been ordered not to speak, but their bodies swayed slightly as they shifted weight, their insect-like limbs clicking softly against the ground. Mira knew they were waiting for something. She had no doubt that the trial was far from over. The leader returned before long, his tall frame outlined against the swirling clouds. The red markings on his shell seemed brighter now under the dimmer light. He looked down into the pit without a word. Behind him, A group of warriors carried something wrapped in thick woven cloth. The bundle moved, jerking violently from time to time. Whatever was inside was alive. The warriors set the bundle near the edge and stepped back. At a signal from the leader, they untied the knots. The cloth fell away, revealing another creature. It was not a reptile like the Great One. This thing was built for speed, with long, powerful legs and thin, sharp claws. Its head was narrow, its eyes a burning red, and its mouth opened in a hiss that revealed rows of needle-like teeth. The small reptile behind Mira let out a frightened chirp. The Great One rumbled deeply, its muscles tensing. Mira could tell. At once this creature was a predator from outside the jungle, likely brought here as a deliberate threat. Without hesitation, the warriors kicked the predator toward the edge of the pit. It dug its claws into the ground to resist, but they forced it over. It landed lightly on its feet, its eyes already locked on the smaller reptile. Mira's heart pounded. She knew the Zark had staged this moment. They wanted to see if the Great One's loyalty would hold, and perhaps if hers would to. The predator wasted no time. It sprinted forward, faster than she had expected. The Great One moved to block it, but the small reptile darted away in panic, and the predator changed direction mid-run, aiming straight for the young one. Mira reacted instantly. She ran forward, waving her arms and shouting, trying to draw its attention away. The predator slowed, confused for a moment, then swerved toward her. Its speed was terrifying, the ground blurring beneath its feet. At the last second, the Great One lunged in from the side, its massive jaws snapping shut. Inches from the predator's head, the impact of the lunge shook the ground. The predator twisted away, slashing with its claws. One claw scraped across the Great One's shoulder, leaving a shallow cut. The sound that came from the Great One was unlike anything Mira had heard, a roar of pure defiance. It drove forward, forcing the predator back step by step. Mira stayed close to the smaller reptile, keeping herself between it and the fight. Above, the Zark murmured in rapid clicks. Some leaned forward, eager to see the outcome. Others exchanged slow, deliberate gestures, as if already making judgments about what they saw. The predator tried to leap over the Great One, aiming for the young one again. Mira stepped into its path, swinging her satchel like a weapon. The impact caught the predator across the side of its head, making it stumble. The Great One seized the opening and struck, clamping its jaws round the predator's back leg. A sharp yelp echoed through the pit as the predator was thrown across the space. It landed heavily. Struggling to stand, the Great One advanced, each step deliberate, its golden eyes fixed on its enemy. The predator hissed one last time before retreating, limping toward the far wall. It scrambled up the vines with desperate speed, leaving the pit entirely. The Zark warriors above stepped aside to let it vanish into the jungle. Silence fell again, broken only by the sound of rain beginning to fall from the clouds above. The drops pattered against the leaves and vines, dripping into the pit in small streams. The Great One turned back to Mira. It lowered its head, breathing heavily but still steady. The cut on its shoulder oozed a thin line of dark blood. Mira moved toward it without hesitation. She tore a strip from the edge of her clothing and pressed it gently against the wound. The Great One did not pull away. Instead, it remained still, watching her with those steady golden eyes. The small reptile crept closer, sniffing at the strip of cloth as if curious about her actions. From above, the leader spoke. His voice carried over the rain, deep and clear. The Great One fights for you. You fight for it. This is not the way of prey. Mira looked up at him. Humans are not prey. The leader tilted his head, the faintest movement of his mandibles suggesting thought. Perhaps we begin to see this, but one test remains. He turned away, and the warriors followed him into the jungle, leaving the pit under the quiet watch of only two guards. Mira knew this meant the final challenge would come soon. The rain grew heavier, turning the soil under her feet into soft mud. She sat down beside the Great One, the small reptile curling up between them. Her fingers rested lightly on the creature's scales. The heat from its body was a comfort against the cooling air. For the first time since arriving on this world, Mira felt she was no longer alone. The bond she had formed with the Great One was not just trust, it was mutual protection. They had fought side by side, defended each other, and stood against both planned trials and real danger. As the rain fell and the sky darkened further, Mira closed her eyes for a moment. She knew the final stage of the trial could be the most dangerous yet, but she also knew something else. Whatever the Zark threw at her next, she would not face it alone. The Great One lifted its head slightly, scanning the rim of the pit. Mira followed its gaze. Somewhere in the shadows above, a new set of eyes was watching them. She could feel the weight of that unseen stare, cold and calculating. The final test was coming, and it would decide not only her fate, but perhaps the way the Zark viewed humans forever. The rain had stopped, leaving the jungle wet and heavy with the smell of earth and leaves. The pit was darker now, but the Great One's golden eyes shone brightly in the shadows. Mira sat quietly beside the creature, feeling the steady rise and fall of its chest beneath her hand. The small reptile was asleep, nestled between them. Suddenly, the silence was broken by a sharp sound, a loud click from above. Mira's head snapped up. The Zark leader stood at the edge of the pit, his arms raised. The tribe had returned, their faces serious and focused. The final trial begins. The leader announced, his voice strong and clear. The crowd fell silent, waiting to see what would happen next. Mira stood slowly, brushing mud from her clothes. She looked at the Great One, who rose with a low rumble. The small reptile blinked awake and moved to stand beside its parent, without warning. The ground beneath the pit's edge shifted. Huge vines dropped into the pit, curling down like snakes. The Zark warriors pulled ropes attached to the vines, tightening them so that they blocked the only clear path out of the pit. Mira's heart sank. She realized this trial was not just about survival. It was a test of strength, courage, and trust. If she could escape, she would prove she was worthy. If she failed, the Zark might never accept her. The leader's voice echoed down, "You must climb out of the pit. But beware, the vines hold more than just ropes. Watch your step." Mira looked at the vines closely. Thick leaves hid sharp thorns that could tear skin easily. The vines twisted around each other, making climbing difficult. She knew that if she slipped, she could fall many feet onto the hard ground below. The Great One growled softly, stepping forward to stand near the vines. Mira placed a hand on its rough scales. "We do this together," she said. She took a deep breath and reached for the nearest vine. The thorns pricked her fingers, but she did not pull away. She began to climb, careful with every movement. The Great One followed behind her, using its powerful legs to push itself up the side of the pit. The small reptile scrambled after them, its claws finding grip on the damp earth. Mira's muscles burned as she climbed higher. The vines swayed in the wind, making the task harder. She could hear the Zark watching from above, their voices rising in soft clicks. Suddenly, one of the vines shifted sharply, a hidden trap. A thick rope snapped free, swinging toward her like a whip. Mira ducked just in time. The rope struck the pit wall with a loud crack. She looked up and saw a warrior smirking above, testing her resolve. She pushed herself harder. The Great One was right behind her, breathing heavily but steady. The small reptile was close too, its eyes bright with determination. As they climbed higher, the pit seemed endless. The ropes and vines twisted into a complicated maze. Mira's hand slipped once, and she caught herself just before falling. The leader's voice boomed down again. "Show us your courage. Show us your will." Mira glanced at the Great One, and their eyes met. She felt a wave of strength. Together, they could face any challenge. Near the top, a sudden movement caught her eye. From the shadows of the jungle, a group of smaller creatures appeared, quick, agile hunters with sharp claws and bright eyes. They moved like shadows, ready to attack. Mira froze. The Great One growled low, stepping protectively in front of her. The small reptile hissed, ready to fight. The hunters leapt toward the pit, climbing quickly along the vines and branches. Mira gripped the vine tighter, pulling herself higher. The Great One roared loudly, a sound that shook the jungle. The hunters stopped for a moment, startled by the roar. Then they attacked together, jumping at the Great One. The fight was fierce. The Great One used its strong tail and jaws to defend itself, while the small reptile darted around, distracting the hunters. Mira watched carefully, ready to help. She grabbed a thick branch and swung it at one hunter climbing near her. The creature hissed and retreated. The battle lasted only minutes, but it felt much longer. When the hunters finally gave up and slipped away into the jungle, Mira's heart was pounding. She looked up. The top of the pit was close. The vines tangled around the edges, but a clear path waited. Mira climbed faster, the Great One right behind her. The small reptile followed closely. As she reached the top, she pulled herself over the edge and lay flat on the ground, gasping for breath. The leader stood nearby, watching. He nodded slowly. You have done what many could not. You have faced danger, pain, and fear. You have proven your spirit. Mira looked down into the pit. The Great One and its young companion were still climbing, strong and sure. When they reached the top, the Great One lowered its massive head toward Mira. She reached out and touched its scales once more. Round them, the Zark tribe began to cheer, their voices loud and full of respect. The leader spoke again. You have earned your place among us, not because you are human, but because you are brave. Mira smiled, tired but proud. The trial was over. Together, she and the Great One stood, side by side, ready to face whatever came next, not as enemies, but as allies. The sun rose slowly over the jungle, casting warm light across the leaves and vines that wrapped around the ancient trees. The air was fresh, carrying the sound of birdsong and the quiet movements of small creatures waking from sleep. Mira stood at the edge of the clearing, her eyes resting on the Zark tribe gathered before her. The great reptile beside her, the Great One, lowered its head in respect. The small reptile stayed close, its tail brushing gently against Mira's leg. The Zark leader stepped forward, his shell shining softly in the sunlight. He looked at Mira and nodded. You have passed the trials. You have shown courage, strength, and heart. You are no longer a prisoner. You are one of us. Mira felt a quiet joy rising inside her. The journey had been long and difficult, but now she was part of something greater. She was accepted by a people so different from her own, and yet she had found a place here. In this wild and strange world, the leader continued, our tribe has watched many outsiders. Most come with fear or with weapons, but you came with respect. You fought alongside the Great One, not against it. That is why we honor you. Mira stepped forward and bowed slightly. Thank you. I only wanted to prove that humans can be trusted, that we can protect and learn and grow. A murmur of approval rose from the tribe. The guards relaxed, the tension lifting from the air. Suddenly, from the edge of the clearing, a group of younger Zark approached. Their faces were curious and open. They carried gifts, bright fruits, flowers from deep in the jungle, and carved stones that shimmered with color. One of the young Zark, a female, with soft green markings, stepped forward and held out a small, woven bracelet. It was made of vines and tiny beads, carefully braided together. For you, she said softly, a symbol of our trust and friendship. Mira smiled and took the bracelet. She slipped it onto her wrist, feeling the rough texture against her skin. It was simple, but it meant more than words. The Great One rumbled, and Mira knew the tribe was ready to celebrate. The fear and challenges of the past days melted away, replaced by a quiet hope. As the day grew brighter, the Zark tribe gathered around a fire in the center of the clearing. They sang songs in their clicking language, sounds that echoed through the trees like music. Mira listened, amazed by the beauty and mystery of their voices. She looked at the Great One and whispered, we did it, together. The reptile responded with a soft growl. Nuzzling her hand, the small reptile joined in, rubbing its head against her knee. Mira felt a deep peace she had not known before. Here, in the heart of the jungle, she had found something precious, a new family, a new home. In the days that followed, Mira learned the ways of the Zark. She watched how they moved silently through the trees, how they read the signs of the jungle, and how they cared for each other. She shared stories of Earth and listened to the legends of the tribe. Her presence changed the tribe, too. The Tsar began to see humans not as strangers or enemies, but as friends and allies. One evening, as the twin moons rose high above the jungle canopy, Mira stood beside the leader. They looked out over the dark forest, its shadows deep and alive. We'll explore the stars together, Mira said, her voice steady. There's much to learn from each other. The leader nodded. The universe is wide. Our worlds can grow closer. The Great One stepped forward, its eyes glowing softly in the moonlight. Mira placed her hand on its head. The journey had begun. The end.